So today we're going to be talking about structural pattern or text structure. And my students know that the reason I teach it to them both ways, structural pattern and text structure, is because sometimes we hear it asked of us differently. Some of us have been asked in iReady to identify the structural pattern, whereas sometimes in school we refer to it as text structure during lessons. So they both mean exactly the same thing, and we're going to get into that in just a second. So what is text structure and why do we need to know this? That's one of the questions I know students have often. Okay, so I'm being taught this, but why do I need it to become a better reader? Well, first of all, what is text structure or structural pattern? It's the way that an author organizes or structures or sets up the text, okay? And authors do this to make it easier for us to understand. When I'm reading something, if I can pick up on the text structure or the structural pattern, I'm able to do some really neat things while I'm reading. Now, although what I'm teaching you is going to take a few minutes as we go through the lesson, and then when you do your work, that's going to take even more time. But as you become a more mature reader and practice these strategies, finding text structure or structural pattern will become automatic in your brain as you become a better reader and a more mature reader. So although it's taking time now, the more we practice this, the faster we'll be able to do it in our brains quickly as we get older. So again, text structure is given to us by the author to make the information that we're reading about easier to understand. And then why do we need to know this? Well, that's a question I get asked all the time. When we are reading a text and we're identifying the text structure, there are several things that help me as the reader. First thing is when I know how the author organized the information, I can start making predictions as I'm reading, because we know as good readers, we should be making predictions in our head as we're reading. I can also make connections, and we know that we can connect the text to ourselves. We can connect the text to something else that we read. We can connect the text to a movie or a book. Again, good readers are making those connections the entire time they're reading. We can also develop inferences, and my students know that an inference is a good guess about something the author didn't explain in the text. That's important. Making inferences is huge when you're reading, because sometimes the author gives you a tiny little bit of information and they want your brain to do the thinking. So they don't always explain it. Well, knowing the text structure will help us to make those inferences or read between the lines. It also helps us to summarize. So on the next screen, you're going to see a whole list of the different text structures that we might see in a text. But if I can pick up on the text structure, I can tell you what I read about. For example, chronological order. We know that's putting events in order in which they occurred. Well, if I can pick up on that, if I go to tell somebody else or I go to write a summary, I can just think in my head, okay, what are the steps that I read about in the text? And easily I can remember those. Okay, so that's text structure, and that is why we need to know this and understand it. So I'm not going to go through this slide because I've gone through this with my students many times. It was hanging up in our classroom. If you need this to use while you're doing your work this week, well, go ahead, you can print it out or just leave it up in a window. But this can help you to identify the type of text structure, the purpose, and also it gives you clues that you can look for in the text that will help you identify which text structure the author is using. So just very quickly, I'll go through the types of text structure that we can see. Chronological order, which we know means events that are in order in which they occurred. Cause and effect, and we know that this tells what events happened and why they happened. We also know that compare and contrast tells how ideas are the same and different. Problem and solution tells a problem and how the problem was solved. And then description, which is all specific details that tell about an event or a person or something that's going on in the text. In other words, the author is giving us very specific information about someone or something that's going on in the text. Okay, so those are our text structures that we're going to be looking for. Okay, so I'm going to read a text to you. I took this from last week's work, or maybe 2 weeks ago, but I'm going to read a text to you. It's going to sound familiar. And as I'm reading, I'm going to do a little bit of thinking out loud so that you can hear how my brain reads and just kind of is trying to identify how the author organized this. When labor laws left farm workers behind and vulnerable to abuse. In 1935 and 1938, laws were passed by Congress to protect workers. Okay, jumping out of reading mode for just a second. When I hear the words protect workers, okay, and I see the word laws, right away in my brain, I'm starting to think, wait a minute, why would somebody have to pass a law to protect workers? Sounds like something might be going wrong here. Let me keep reading. Congress is a part of the U.S. government that write laws for the whole country. The laws from the 1930s made it easier for many workers to get together and join trade unions. And you guys remember that unions, jumping out of reading mode again, you remember that unions are groups of workers that came together, formed an organization to make their work life much better. Okay, jumping back into reading. These unions elected their own leaders to bargain with employers for better working conditions and more money. Okay, so jumping out of reading again. So as you can hear, apparently there must have been some really unfair things going on with workers back in the 1930s. Otherwise, why would anybody want to create laws to protect the workers? Okay, jumping back in. However, farm workers were not included in these laws. This meant that they had no way to improve their working conditions. In the 1930s, almost all farm workers were African American. 80 years later, Mexicans have replaced most Black Americans in the field. Even today, farm workers still do not have the same rights given to most other workers. That sounds like a problem to me. As I'm reading this, I'm noticing that there were laws passed to protect workers, but that's a problem when not all workers are covered under the same laws. And I wonder why that is. To me, that sounds like a true and real problem. So just kind of jumping back to my previous slide, and I'm thinking about which one of these text structures would fit here. So far, my brain is leaning towards problem and solution. Now, I don't know if there's going to be a solution, so I'm going to read the next slide to you. And we're going to see what we can figure out here. California governor steps up. Some states have been trying to change the laws. Okay, jumping out of reading mode for a second. Well, here we go. Trying to change the laws. So I'm thinking if they're changing laws and the title of this paragraph here, California governor steps up, I'm thinking I might be headed towards a solution, but let me keep reading to find out. One of these states is California, which has about 417,000 farm workers. These workers are employed by the most productive farms in the nation. In 1975, the governor, Jerry Brown, signed an agreement with farm workers. This new law gave them the right to form unions. Well, there we go. Okay, so I'm seeing here that in the state of California, they're trying to resolve this problem. They're trying to pass laws back in the 1970s that made it more fair for the farm workers by joining unions. And remember, you have to know what union means in order to get what the author's trying to tell you here. Unions were groups of workers that formed an organization to make their work environment more fair and more safe for them. Okay, let me keep reading. In 2016, Brown signed a law that would shorten the current workday, which is 10 hours long. Over time, the workday for farm workers will drop to 8 hours. If anyone works more than 8 hours, farms will have to pay for that extra time. Okay, that's interesting to me because based on what I just read here, I'm going to make a quick inference. I'm going to infer that many, many years ago, farm workers were forced to work overtime and were not paid because it says right here, if anyone works more than 8 hours, farms will have to pay for that extra time. Okay, so do you see how I'm leaning towards problem and solution, and I'm able to make an inference here? because I know that I read the problem and now I'm moving into what the solution might be. Let me keep reading. Governor Brown's decision was praised by the U.S. Department of Labor. The Department of Labor is part of the federal government. It keeps track of the conditions of workers across the country. It also must follow the laws written by Congress, including those from 1930s. The Labor Department does not agree with the laws passed by Congress in the 1930s. Okay, guys, so yeah, I am seeing problem and solution here. I know that there was a problem in the 1930s where farm workers were treated unfairly. And I know over the years how the laws have changed and were changed to help meet the needs of the farm workers. So I'm leaning towards problem and solution. However, just because I picked one text structure does not mean that there can't be more than one. Maybe some of you are looking at this and saying, wait a minute, I kind of think it's another text structure. Well, if you are, you're probably right. If you can hear and feel that text structure in there and it's not what I told you it was, you're probably right, because the way we read the text affects how we're going to be able to understand the text structure. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, so here are a couple of different structural patterns that you may have thought it was. Well, first of all, problem and solution. I just went through all that. Look at my evidence. Look right here, okay? I literally copied and pasted right from the text to prove how I think the structural pattern is problem and solution. Look right here. However, farm workers were not included in these laws. This meant they had no way to improve their working conditions. Right from the text. So when you do your work this week, guys, you have to type right from the text what your evidence is to support your text structure. Some of you might have also thought, hey, wait a minute. Yeah, I hear problem and solution, but there might also be compare and contrast. Agreed. Okay, compare and contrast. We could say that the author was trying to compare the laws in the 1930s to the laws in the 1970s and even to 2016. What is my evidence of that? Again, I copied and pasted. In 1935 and 1938, laws were passed by Congress. Okay, and then look, in 1975, the Governor Jerry Brown signed an agreement with farm workers. This new law gave them the right to form unions. So yeah, you could say that there is some compare and contrast there. Okay, your turn. Now you're going to give it a try. You just heard me think aloud. You just saw me demonstrate to you how I was able to pick out the structural pattern and how I was able to back up my answer by using text evidence. That's what you have to do this week. That's going to be your assignments on EDSB. Okay, so I'm going to ask you to pause this video. I'm going to ask you to read a very familiar text. We read this in 4th grade. Some of you will remember it. And then I want you to give it a try to see if you can identify what structural pattern or patterns you may see in what you're about to read. So go ahead and pause this video and give it a try. Okay, I hope that you were able to give it a try, and I hope that you were thinking of what structural pattern that might be. Well, if you said chronological order, which means putting events in order, you are correct. There is definitely evidence of chronological order there, and here's some evidence that I pulled to support that. Maybe you thought of the same evidence to back up your answer. But also, and this is a really difficult one for students, I get a lot of students that give me this next one as an answer, and it's not quite right. Description. If you notice in the text, the author is using specific details. I feel like I am in that earthquake with these poor people because of all the specific details that are happening. Listen to the evidence. Suddenly, everything trembles. The bowl creeps across the table. Then even the table crawls away. Chin spills water everywhere. That is specific details that tell us moment by moment what is happening. Okay, guys, so I hope you were able to give it a try. So now you're going to go ahead and you're going to read your own text in EDSB.